Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at the third annual Coalesce. My name is Amada Echeverria, and I'm on the community team at DBT Labs. So I'm thrilled to be hosting today's session, From Excel to IDE and Beyond, the origins and future of the data developer. So we'll be joined by our speaker, Katie Heinsohn, who is a product manager at Lightdash. Fun fact about Katie, if you go deep into the YouTube archives, she was in a DBT promotion video back in 2019 talking about how DBT changed their data team for the better at Monzo. And our chat champ, Victoria, is sharing that in Slack now. So that should be fun. And thank you, Victoria. So before we jump into things, some recommendations for making the best out of this session. All chat conversation is taking place in Coalesce from Excel to channel of DBT Slack. So if you're not part of the chat, you have time to join right now. Visit getdbt.com/community and search for Coalesce from Excel to when you enter the space. So we encourage you to set up Slack and your browser side by side so you can ask other attendees questions, make comments, or react at any point in the channel. And lucky for everyone, after the session, Katie will be available in the Slack channel to answer your questions. But you don't have to wait till the end. We encourage you to ask questions at any point during the session, and she'll get to them. So thanks, everyone, and let's get started. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the intro, Amada. So if you head to that video on YouTube, you can tell I've been a DBT groupie from the start. And as you can see, like presenting at Coalesce, some things haven't changed. But today I'm not going to be talking about how awesome DBT is. Instead, I'm going to be talking about something equally as awesome, which is the data development workflow. But yeah, before we dig into it, I'll just introduce myself. I am Katie, and I'm the head of product and data at Lightdash, which is a BI tool that seamlessly integrates with your DBT project. And I've been working in data for almost a decade now, and a lot of things have changed in my time in data, but some things haven't changed, and I think it's time that they do. Specifically, I think that data analysts have become way more technical in the last 10 years, but our development workflows just don't reflect this. So as data analysts or analytics engineers, we're not working in Excel and Tableau anymore. We're working in GitHub and VSCode and BigQuery and our command line. We're developing a lot more like engineers, but our development workflows just haven't kept up. And I think that we deserve better. So I'm going to pose what I think better could look like, and I'm going to kind of talk through some examples of what I think the potentials are for change. So before we jump in, I'm going to give a bit of background about how things have actually changed in the last 10 years. And I'm also going to explain what I mean when I talk about data development. But imagine you're back in 2012 and Amazon Redshift came in on the scene. And they revolutionized data warehousing with something called massively parallel processing. So before Redshift, the problem was speed. We had to transform data before loading it because the warehouse was too slow to do it itself. And now it wasn't a problem. So we got this huge explosion of new products in the space. In the 5 years after Redshift, we got data extraction tools like Stitch and Fivetran. We got data transformation tools like DBT, and we got BI tools like Looker and Metabase. Basically, we now had a data stack that could be managed by someone who wasn't a data engineer. So you could hire a data analyst with some experience in this stuff to fully manage your entire data stack. So this new tooling meant that data teams were empowered to be more technical than they'd ever been before. So now data analysts and their job descriptions are expected to know how to use their command line, how to use GitHub, or how to use a cloud IDE. And we started to care way more about building and maintaining data sets that were version controlled and tested and documented. And we started to model our data in a way that empowered end users to answer their own questions instead of just building one-off analyses for ourselves. So it became a lot less of the Excel and Tableau And now it was way more GitHub and VSCode and BigQuery and our command line. So we ended up with this revolution in the tools that we were using, so much that we developed new roles in the space. So this is where the analytics engineer came in as well, when we had a bunch of these different skills that we were using. And data teams were now more like data developers than we were business analysts. Okay, so we had this amazing revolution in all of our tools. It was so cool, it was so awesome, but some things just didn't keep up. And specifically, I'm talking about the integrations across these new and exciting tools, or the data pipelines, as we like to call them. Now, as data builders, we feel so empowered by a lot of these tools, right? We understand each of their individual uses deeply. We remember what it was like before these tools made our lives so much easier. So we feel like we have this like Ferrari engine that's powering our analytics. And sure, all of these bits are amazing on their own, but when we cobble them together, it looks a bit less like a Ferrari and more like this like mismatched car that I have here. So developing in this data pipeline kind of sucks. And when I talk about data development, I'm talking about adding things within this data pipeline. So for example, adding a new field into your DBT model, or setting up testing for one of your models, or interacting with your BI tool. And I'm gonna kind of really try to highlight what I mean when I say that this is a broken process. So I'm going to walk through an example of a really common development process that a lot of us use every single day, which is you create a new model or field in DBT, and then you add that model or field to your BI tool so that you can use it in a chart. Okay, first step, easy. We just add our new model to DBT using VS Code or whatever text editor you use, or maybe even DBT Cloud. This one's like really straightforward. It's a one tool system. It's easy to do. And then once we've built our model, we test it out. So we do DBT run my model, but we get a SQL error. Yeah, I mean, getting your SQL right on the first try, I think is like a once in a lifetime experience. So this step where I have to debug my SQL is really common for me, at least. So I try to find my compiled query in the depths of my DBT target folder, and then I copy the code, I open BigQuery, and I paste it there to try to debug the SQL. And then once I've made my SQL actually run properly, I've removed that trailing comma. Actually, that's not a thing anymore. I've added my comma that was missing maybe. I go back to DBT, and then I copy paste my query, and I double check to make sure I haven't copy pasted into the target folder, because if you know, you know. And then I rerun my DBT model and everything runs smoothly. This is great. So the next step is that now that my DBT run works, I spend time manually adding some documentation to my model, because yes, I'm still one of those people who documents everything. And then I spend some time, maybe adding a few out of the box tests like uniqueness, not null values. And then once I'm done that, I run DBT test to make sure everything works. And of course, something fails. So then I go back through the cycle of opening up BigQuery to debug my tests and adding these updates to DBT. And this might happen a few times before I finally figured it out. And then once I've got all of these things working, I finally push my model into GitHub. I do a code review, probably make some changes in DBT again, and then I merge it in GitHub. But I need this model today, because I need to build this like dashboard that exec has asked for that needs to be done now. So once I've merged my changes, I need to rerun my models in Airflow. I manually trigger the part of my DAG that is affected by my changes, and I wait for everything to run. And while I'm waiting for my model to run, I head to Looker, I create a view for my model, I then manually add all of the documentation that I just spend a lot of time writing in DBT to Looker. Annoying. And then I add some metrics maybe in my LookML, and I'm finally ready to build my chart. So the data's run, everything's good to go. I'm in Looker, I'm in my view. So I go ahead and I build a chart with my new beautiful model, or my field that I've just added. But there's something weird happening with one of my metrics in my plot. And so I go to the LookML and it looks fine. So it must be the underlying data model. I probably roll my eyes, take a deep breath, potentially go and check the memes and off-topic chat in DBT Slack, because I just need some joy back in my life. Because now I have to go all the way back to the very start of my pipeline and start the whole process again. And so a lot of this is familiar to most of us in developing in your data pipeline. And this is like a 15-step process for adding something new to your BI tool, which we do pretty regularly. Now, really, the very, very first step of this workflow should be the biggest time sink, which is writing SQL and making sure it works. But in reality, we end up with a bunch of these unconnected apps that require a lot of time and effort to coordinate them. So actually getting our data model up and running in the rest of our data pipeline takes way longer than it should. So going from building the data model to actually using the data model is this chaos development spaghetti. Now, I thought about this a lot last year or this year, I guess, and I just decided there's no way that I was the only one who was like, this is so horrible. There were just so many tools, so much room for error, and it just took so long to do anything. And misery loves company, so I went looking for some company. And I spent a bunch of time interviewing and just talking to different data people across different companies and different tech stacks, and asked about their experiences with developing data. And I ended up finding that almost everyone had a similar level of chaos to the one I just described in their data pipeline. And after talking to everyone, I tried to figure out common problems across the different experiences. And there were a bunch of them, but I think I'm just going to focus on 3 today and talk through those. So the 3 big problems that I pulled out from the data development workflow were, first of all, there are so few testing environments. So DBT is one of the few tools that actually does this well, but even then I have to go and test my SQL changes in BigQuery all the time. And another of the big issues is, why can't I test my changes in my BI tool before I merge them? Why do I have to go all the way back to the start? The second problem is that you have to switch through so many tools to get any task done. And like we saw in our last example, we're flipping through at least 3 tools to develop anything, because each of them has a little bit of different context that we need. So why can't we just bring all of this context together in one place? And the third problem is that things are not easily kept in sync. So adding docs to DBT, adding fields to Looker or Metabase, and just trying to get your DBT changes in your production data sets, and then adding them and syncing them to your BI tools. It shouldn't be so manual, and it shouldn't take this long. Okay, so the rest of my time here, I'm going to spend talking through how a lot of these problems that we face in data development already have solutions in software development tools. And I'm going to show you what I mean by actually proposing some solutions that are heavily inspired by software development tools. On we go. So the first problem that I talked about is that there are so few testing environments when we're developing. Now, in software development, we have a tool called Netlify, which is a great example of a solution to this problem. At Lightdash, for example, we've connected Netlify previews to work so that any time that we make changes to our docs, we see it in, I open a PR, I've made some changes, and Netlify automatically spins up a developer preview environment there. So I can review what our docs would look like if I publish my changes. I actually get to see what my changes would look like in production before I merge them, which is wild. But it shouldn't be wild. We should have these previews in data development. So if we use this as inspiration data, we quickly realize that this should also be a thing that we have access to when developing in our data pipelines. So you should be able to see how your changes affect things downstream in your pipeline before you merge them. And to give you an example of what this could look like in data, we built something kind of like Netlify, but for data at Lightdash. And these were called developer previews or Lightdash preview. Now, as I said, this was heavily inspired by Netlify. So you just run Lightdash preview on the command line where you're developing your DBT project. And then this automatically spins up a temporary preview of your Lightdash instance. So you can test the dimensions and metrics that you've added to DBT and just see if everything makes sense before you try to move on to the next stages of your changes. So with something like developer previews, testing changes from DBT in your BI tool goes from this to this, which is nice, right? So this is the kind of testing environment experience that we deserve in data development to just optimize the development experience that we have. Now, the second problem that I talked about, which is we switch through so many tools to get tasks done. Now, in software development, there are a bunch of examples of tools which solve this by, aggregating all of the context you need to solve a problem into a single place. And I'm going to talk about one of those solutions or one of those tools, which is Sentry. So Sentry is this open source error tracking tool, and it has like full stack traces and asynchronous context. But basically, it lets you really quickly find and fix production errors. And the big inspiration I'm going to take from this tool is the context to solve the problem is aggregated into a single place. So I see that there's an error, but then I can click on it and I'm told what's erroring. I'm also told about this error in a place that makes the most sense to my organization, which is Slack. Now imagine if we built something like Sentry, but for DBT errors. So it would have all of the context aggregated into a single message. And here's kind of like what I picture it could look like. So I imagine this would happen in Slack because that's the place where you most likely want to hear about things because most of us spend, let's be honest, too much time in Slack. So the first thing here would be that there would be information about which model was having problems and then an indicator for how severe the error was. The second thing you'd see is you'd be able to click on a button to debug the error in BigQuery or whatever data warehouse you're using. So this would actually open the query editor in BigQuery with the compiled SQL for your test, so you could investigate the rows that are breaking your test. The third thing is that you'd have this error message, which would tell you information about which test was breaking, how many failures there were, kind of important metadata to let you make a decision about how critical this was. And then the fourth thing was that it would tag the last person to have modified that data model. So it basically auto-assigns people to deal with their errors. Now, you'd be able to resolve this issue directly in Slack with just the click of a button. This sounds really cool, right? And I think it's the way that it should be. So debugging errors from your DBT models in production goes from this to something like this. And we deserve this kind of simplicity in data development. Now, the third problem is that things just aren't kept in sync. So in software development, we have this thing called continuous integration and continuous deployment, or CI/CD. And this is really common practice. So CI/CD is a way to frequently deliver apps to your users by adding automation into the stages of app development. So tools like Circle CI let you implement CI/CD practices in your pipelines by building, testing, and deploying things automatically. So you could do things like, automatically run tests on an open PR or trigger your code to deploy to all instances once something has been merged to main. It lets you just change things and quickly iterate on them while keeping everything in sync automatically. Now imagine if we had continuous integration and continuous deployment, but for data. So you change something in your DBT project and it's automatically just propagated along the rest of your data pipeline. So if we picture it, this would be things like, changes in our DBT models are automatically synced in our BI tools, or the documentation is just immediately pushed across all the tools that needed, or opening in PR automatically runs tests to check if your changes break anything in any of the other integrated platforms. And there's more examples of things like this, but this is the dream state. And if we break down this dream state a bit, then we can imagine that all these steps are probably something like a GitHub action, which you can get in the marketplace and add to your repo. So we tried to bring an example of this to life at Lightdash, and we actually built a GitHub action that we use to automatically deploy our DBT changes to our Lightdash instance. So this means that if there's a DBT project update, then that's automatically pushed to Lightdash, and those two tools are just kept in sync without any manual intervention. Now, we also created another GitHub action where we deploy one of these preview environments I was talking about at the start whenever we open a PR. So someone reviewing your PR can open your DBT changes in Lightdash and actually play around with the output. And this is all automated. So the testing that we have is like this automated integration that just makes it so that it's way more reliable to actually look at the changes that are being implemented in DBT. Now, this all sounds pretty awesome, right? And it should be the way that data development works with these kinds of tools. Okay, so I've talked through the 3 problems that data teams face, and I've also talked through some ideas for how I think that we can actually solve these problems. And this is all great, but what should you actually do about all of this information? Well, I think that we need to change how we think about development in the data pipeline. Specifically, I think that we need to stop thinking about data development as a linear process where information is just handed off between each step or tool. And instead, we need to start thinking about it as a system that needs to be optimized. Now, by doing this, you start thinking about things differently and asking yourself different questions. Things like, how many touch points or tools are being introduced to make a change? Or how can the team quickly and reliably collaborate across the system? Or how fast is it to go from inception to production and then iterate on that? And these are the same problems that software developers have faced and optimized for more than the last 10 years since we've become really technical as data people. So if we start thinking about data development as a system that needs to be optimized, then we can borrow a lot of similar ideas from software development to solve similar problems. And we want the same amazing development experiences that software developers have for data teams. We want to go from this like weird broken up car to that sweet experience of actually driving a Ferrari. We want to develop like engineers. But to do that, we need to change how we think about development in the data pipeline. And that's it. So thank you for listening. And I hope that I've got your brain juices flowing a bit and thinking about how you can actually improve the data development experiences. But if you have any questions or just want to chat, there's a Slack channel set up. We also have tools Lightdash in the DBT Slack community, or you can join the Lightdash community using this QR code. But yeah, thanks so much for listening.
Awesome. Thank you for a great presentation, Katie, and thank you so much for your time. So folks, luckily you don't have to fight your way through a crowd to meet the speaker. Instead, you can just speak with her directly on Slack. So for those of you joining live, stay in the Coalesce from Excel 2 channel on DBT Community Slack if you'd like to continue the Q&A with Katie. So the next session, titled Deliver Fresh Data with DBT and Stream and Finding Common Ground to Build Common Ground, DBT at the Enterprise, will be starting at 9:45 a.m. CDT. So both of these sessions will be starting in about 15 minutes. We hope to see you at one of them. And Katie, thank you again for your time. This has been delightful.